Welcome to the first episode of Lifestyle Gardening. I'm Kim Todd, and we're glad you could join us for an in-depth look at off-season gardening topics. Good gardeners know that the season doesn't end on a date in the calendar, and we'll be exploring some of those topics that we haven't been able to cover on our spring and summer show. We're going to start today's program with a look at starting seeds indoors for the upcoming growing season.
Starting seeds in a greenhouse or indoors is a really awesome way to get your garden ready for spring when it warms up. One of the most important decisions you'll need to make is picking the right media. You'll want a media that lets water drain through so you don't have standing water in the container, but you also want media that will hold water for the seeds. Every seed needs water to start the germination process. A second factor you really need to consider is proper growing containers. Depending on whether you want to use a seed flat with a cover or a 6-pack, kind of depends on the kind of plant that you're looking to grow. So once you make that decision and you have your seeds, one of the most important things you'll want to check is the back of your seed packet. Every seed has a little different variety of what they need. Some will need light, some will need bottom heat, some won't need that much water, some will need more. So you'll just need to check and do a little research about every seed that you pick before you actually go and sow it. Something else you'll find on the back of the seed packet is a germination time frame. And you really need to consider how long you're going to keep these plants in the pots, because the last thing you want is really leggy, really long plants that are out of room to grow any farther. And if you have to hold them for longer than they should be, you're probably not going to have a successful of a garden when you go to transplant. So once you have your seeds, your soil, and your media, you'll fill the pot with media, you'll smooth it out, and then you'll check the back of your packet again to make sure that you have the right depth. Every seed has a different depth they need, just like I mentioned earlier. You'll poke the hole in the media to the desired depth. These pansies are 1/4 inch, so I would poke a 1/4 inch hole. Place the seeds in the pot and then cover them with soil. Give them a good drink of water, and then set them in the corner of your greenhouse or indoors or wherever you're growing them. And then eventually, once they germinate, you should be able to take them out, put them in your garden when it warms up, and you should have an awesome flower garden. Starting plants from seeds really gives you a great opportunity to get a jump start on your growing season. Plus, you're staying inside where it's nice and warm, and you get to watch these plants grow. There's also an awesome opportunity with the seeds. Some plants only come from seed that you can't necessarily find in a store.
Getting an early jump on the season indoors can really make a difference when the weather warms up. Here are a few things to keep in mind as you get started. First, choose the seeds of plants that you really want to enjoy. Don't start them too early. Get the media right, the watering right. Give those seedlings exactly what they need as listed on the back of the package. You'll really be able to enjoy them early in your garden. We also all enjoy festive plants we have in our homes during the holiday season. They go a long way toward creating lasting memories and a more welcoming holiday atmosphere as we celebrate and enjoy our families. After the holidays, you can still enjoy those poinsettias, amaryllis, and Christmas cactus. It does take a little patience. Let's take the next few minutes to go out to the greenhouse and show you how to keep those holiday plants thriving until next season. People love to get holiday house plants, and then we always get the question about what do we do with them after the holidays, either to keep them healthy or to get them to bloom again next season. One of the most popular ones is obviously poinsettias, which come in this amazing array of colors and forms now. They're fairly simple to keep alive. They're not so simple to get back into bloom again. What you need to do after the holidays is let these beautiful bracts sort of fall off and brown, and then cut those poinsettia stems back to about 4 inches or so, leaving 2 or 3 leaves on them because that is where the new bracts will arise next year. You can then put them in the landscape, just bury the pot in the ground if you want to in the garden. Make sure they're in a part shade environment. Keep them moist, but not too moist, because you can kill poinsettias pretty easily by overwatering them. Bring them back into your home in mid-September. Make sure that during this entire time as you're watering, you're also fertilizing. The tricky part with getting them to rebloom again is that these are short day plants. And what that means is they need complete darkness, not even a speck of light, for 14 to 15 hours a day, 8 to 16 weeks before you actually want them to flower again. So put them in a dark place, cover them, uncover them, don't let that light in there. Once they finally start to show color on the bracts again, you can bring them out and enjoy them for the next season. Christmas cactus is another plant that people really love, and it's also pretty frustrating. They actually are not cactus the way we think about cactus, which means that they like a part shade environment, a bit more moisture, and one of the things that will really cause them great frustration, as well as frustration to the gardener trying to get them to rebloom, is if you have allowed them to dry out. That will cause them to drop their buds. They're also short day. So Christmas cactus, Thanksgiving cactus, and Easter cactus all bloom at different times. If you're concerned about getting them to really bloom when the season says they're supposed to, same thing. After you have enjoyed them flowering in the cool part of your home, which is 50 to 55 degrees, you want to make sure you put them outside, part shade environment, cut them back so they'll rebranch, bring them in for that short day season, keep enough moisture but not too much, and for heaven's sakes, don't let the temperatures rise to above 65 degrees or they'll drop their buds. The third one is amaryllis, and this is actually the easiest. The bulbs are monstrous. You want to cut back the flowering stalk when they're finished. Let those strap-like leaves re-energize the bulb. Put them in the garden, bring them in, let them do a dormant period or cool down, and then the other thing you do is just enjoy that beautiful bloom. One of the really fun things about those holiday houseplants has been actually watching those amaryllis buds open. They go from nothing to elongation to the full trumpet in what seems like just a few hours. And I'm really looking forward to seeing if I can actually keep mine alive over the summer months and enjoy it again next year. Incorporating art pieces into the landscape has also been a time-tested method of adding beauty and uniqueness for centuries. Plastic flamingos and garden gnomes aside, there are plenty of other artistic ways to enhance your outdoor living spaces. For our third feature on lifestyle gardening, we're going to show you a beautifully designed landscape that may inspire you to try art in your garden. Private spaces give you great opportunities to blend art with the garden. Whether you're looking at a teeny space that you can see out a kitchen window, or you have a little more space to work with, like a private courtyard, to be able to choose the pieces, place the pieces, and blend them with all the plants in the landscape gives you wonderful opportunities to be able to wander around and enjoy the art in your own private space. This little courtyard space is only about 40 by 50, and it's a very intimate place. The owner could enjoy viewing this gorgeous fountain from the house, from the arbor, from a covered small table where he could enjoy a cup of coffee. Every single piece in this garden also has a story behind it, and that's one of the wonderful things about collecting art for the garden. There's a beautiful backdrop in this instance so that the piece stands out against something that lets it stand out. Within the piece itself, we have other things like small floating objects. The round balls or the globes are repeated strategically throughout the space, so you get a little bit of a sense of design continuity. Even though in a tiny garden or a small space, every single plant can actually also be sort of a character all by itself. You don't have big masses and sweeps of individual plant species. You have sort of one-of-a-kinds, just like the fountain itself is. And that lets people stroll quietly, enjoy every single change in this particular experience in this small space. In a small space, art pieces can be found objects that are actually repurposed from something else. Take the skeleton, for example. It's probably an old Halloween decoration, but look at how much fun it is peeking into the kitchen window, covered with ivy, displayed against an old iron bathtub that wouldn't fit into the home, with a great trellis that actually repeats some of the elements of the architecture within the surrounding spaces. Art like this is whimsical, fun and something to be discovered by the owner and guests in a private space. This courtyard is actually sized a little bit more like a traditional backyard. More gracious, a little more spacious, good spot for entertaining because we have turf that will allow people to mingle, enjoy one another's company, as well as enjoy the art pieces. The wall itself provides privacy, but it's not so private that the outdoors and the surrounding environment isn't captured to make this space even more beautiful. The really cool thing also is that on the wall, we have a beautiful art object that is a repurposed piece off the old Creighton building from Jobbers Canyon in Omaha. These copper pieces absolutely have a wonderful patina that is repeated in the roof of this garden structure, which gives yet another location for the display of art as well as enjoying the space. We also then have something quirky, and there are lots of these little quirky things sitting around in here. A black painted bowling ball with a little bright red painted table and a couple of lily pads that are perfect for setting a drink on. So within this space, you can enjoy the art objects, there's design continuity, you can explore it and discover little bitty pieces of art all over this courtyard space. Your own personality can shine in your garden if you're trying to figure out whether to purchase a piece for the place or you have a place for the piece. It can be a courtyard, it can be a hidden sort of space behind that courtyard filled with American lotus that absolutely are a piece of art all by themselves. It can be something like repurposing an old dead tree into sort of an interesting, odd object in the space. So let your imagination lead you down the garden path into experimenting with putting art in your own garden. Your imagination is the starting point for art projects in your own landscape. Of course, you don't have to add them all at once. In fact, part of the fun is the hunt and the discovery of different art pieces. As the seasons change, you have an opportunity to add pieces, rearrange what you already have, or start over on a new project as you discover new products and new ideas. If you're cooped up this winter and need a plant-related project to keep you occupied for a few months, why not consider some sort of topiary? The plant material is relatively easy to find, and the shapes you can create are only limited by your imagination. For this week's landscape lesson, we focus on topiaries. On this show, we've talked about starting plants from seed in the winter months. We've talked about how to manage those holiday house plants, and we've talked about art in the garden. One of the great ways to bring all of these things together is obvious in this week's landscape lesson, and we're talking about topiary. You can start some herbs from seed. Rosemary isn't one of them, but it's one of those great indoor house plants, and it makes for great topiary. Ivy is also not something we typically start from seed, but it also is something that you can form into a topiary. And really, topiaries are simply oddball, interesting, unique ways of managing plants so they are forms. Whether they're snowmen or they're round sort of snowballs on a stick, heart-shaped things for Valentine's Day, whether they're actually in the landscape, which is one of the original applications of topiary, wild, strange animals, cones, even hedges are a form of topiary. There are a couple of things to remember, however, about making sure your topiary actually stays the way you want it to. First is you have to start with a small plant. The smaller the better, and you want something that is actually pliable, so you can either form or prune those small twigs and branches to give you the density you want and the shape you want. The thing that people oftentimes forget about topiary, however, is that these are living, growing things, and if you don't keep after them, it's just like growing the hair on your head. You got to cut it once in a while, or pretty soon you're almost like Rapunzel. The topiary that I'm showing, it actually has been allowed to grow out of its form. So what it will require is snipping back, kind of using a little pair of scissors, depending on how tiny your topiary is, and making sure that you give that plant enough foliage so that it can continue to grow. On the other hand, you want to make sure that it keeps the form that you want it to have in the first place. So lots of ways to enjoy topiary as art, not in the garden, but in the indoor garden, as well as to give you one more thing to do in the gardening world during those gray months of the winter. Over the years on our regular Backyard Farmer program, we've shown you video features about growing your outdoor gardens and landscapes. Topiaries are a great project to start in the fall or winter to add beauty and fun to your indoor spaces and to move to your patio when spring arrives. You know, we can't call ourselves Backyard Farmer without answering a few questions from our viewers, so this will be a regular feature on our program. You can still send your questions to byf@unl.edu. Up first, we have a question from an Omaha viewer, and this is probably timely for a lot of people, especially in the eastern part of the state. They have a problem with their white pine, and in this late cold snap, what has happened is the needles have actually gone limp, hanging very, very dark and green and low and down, kind of like a wrist like this. Their question is whether that tree will actually recover. Usually all that tree is doing is those needles are responding to the cold. That's a way for them to protect themselves. And once it warms up again, they will perk back up. However, the same viewer also sent a picture of some needles that were completely crispy and brown. With any evergreen, whether it's a pine or a spruce or a fir, once those needles go brown, they are not going to recover. So that actually is probably a dead branch. Our second question is actually one about turf, and this is from a York viewer. They actually followed our recommendations to do a fall seeding of a tall fescue lawn, got it in the ground, but they didn't really probably manage it properly. They didn't get enough water on it early in the fall season. So what happened is it germinated and it only came up to maybe an inch or so and then kind of just sat there. Well, of course, we've had already a really, really dry and very cold and kind of an abrupt late fall and winter season. Their concern is, have they actually lost that turf, or what should they expect next year when spring comes? Chances are the turf guys would say you've probably lost a lot of that with winter kill, but the beauty of it is come spring, when our show starts back up again, we'll be able to give you great recommendations to overseed or reseed and start over and actually get a fine lawn established for the upcoming season. Our third question is one about apple trees. This is from a Nebraska City viewer, and they've noticed just recently on some of the younger trees on the horizontal branches what appears to be some bark damage or some chipping. And our critter creature dentist would say that is indeed exactly what that is. That's squirrel damage. What those squirrels are after is some of the nutrients or the micronutrients right under that fine, thin layer of bark. And this viewer actually noted as well that it appears as though this damage has occurred in previous years. Again, squirrels tend to be one of those animals that actually sets up a habit. So if they found those nutrients or they did that chipping on that tree in a previous year, they've now apparently returned to the same spot. Unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot you can do about that. Those sorts of damage that the squirrels cause can actually end up being a canker in certain tree species or can cause branch damage or death in some instances. So unfortunately, about the only thing you can really do in this case is guard those branches with a chicken wire of some sort, which is probably not really very practical. Get rid of the squirrels one way or another. Get a good dog or a great cat, or be out there all the time trying to protect those trees from that squirrel damage. Our fourth question is from a Columbus viewer. And again, this probably has great applicability to a lot of our gardeners in the state. They have shrub roses, and they followed our recommendation to not take them to the ground last fall because they are in fact a shrub. What they're now seeing is a lot of the foliage actually did not fall off, or senesce is actually the scientific word. So they have kind of these crinkly green leaves. They're seeing some green stems, but then where there were some cuts taken earlier in the season, what they're seeing is actually a dead or a brown or a blackish sort of a tip. That's an absolute good indication of why we don't recommend doing a lot of pruning on the shrub roses this time of year or too late in the fall, because what that dead brownish sort of area or black area is a place where that branch has actually died due to the pruning cut. So again, you want to wait now until those roses start leafing out in the spring, and we're talking fairly mid to late spring here, before you do any other additional pruning on those. We also have a question from a viewer, and this is a Facebook question about herbs. And the real question here is, how can you grow herbs, or should you try to grow herbs in the house on the windowsill in the winter months? It's a great idea, nothing better than all those wonderful great herbs in winter dishes like spaghetti. But the things to keep in mind are, do you have enough sun especially if you think about growing some of the herbs like rosemary, which is a Mediterranean kind of an herb that loves those dry coastal conditions, hot and dry conditions. Are you going to be able to give them enough water, but not too much water? Because especially with some of our herbs, overwatering is one of the things that kills them far more than underwatering. You also have to be aware of whether they are sensitive to temperature extremes. Basil in particular really suffers and pouts if the temperatures drop. So if you tend to drop your temperatures in your home in the evening hours or overnight down to 65 or 60 or lower, you may see the basil kind of crinkle up a little bit. So enjoy those herbs, give them enough sun, give them just the right amount of water, but do be aware that you may not have exactly the same kind of growth that you get with other herbs in the garden. It's logical to take care of our landscape plants during the spring, summer, and into the fall when the weather is nice. But a common mistake is to forget to tend to your trees' needs during the winter months, which is when many problems we see during the growing season can begin to take root. For our final feature of the program, Jeff Culbertson will give us some important tips on cold season watering of your trees.
We really need to consider watering our trees and shrubs throughout the fall and into the winter and maybe even into next spring as we go into next year to make sure that these plants are able to make it through the season. One of the things to think about when watering is making sure that we're not putting down water directly at the base of the plants. We want to stay away 6 inches to a foot from the base of the plant. We can cause some injury, increase our chances of rot and that sort of thing. So we want to stay away from there. And then when we're talking about how far around the tree, you know, with new trees like the one I'm standing next to, it was just recently planted, so we know where the root zone is, so we can soak this area. But we might also want to put some water down around the surrounding area because that water will be kind of sucked into the dry soil. So we want to moisten the entire zone. With a bigger tree, you want to aim for the drip zone, depending on the tree. Go beyond that if you feel like, especially with deciduous trees, the roots far exceed the drip zone, so go out as far as you feel comfortable. With a conifer, so an evergreen, a pine or a spruce, you're going to want to go 5 to 10 feet away from the drip zone to try to get out as much of the root zone as you can. As far as the amount of water you put down, we want to moisten the soil. 12 to 18 inches seems like a realistic amount. You can use a stiff wire or a rod of some sort to go down there and make sure that you're getting the water that deep. A general rule is about 10 gallons per inch of circumference around the tree. So you can use things like a 5-gallon bucket with some holes drilled in the bottom to help measure that. That will slowly let it soak in, and that will give you a good idea. Usually 5 minutes at a low rate on your hose will equal about 10 gallons, so that will give you kind of a general rule of thumb. A couple things to remember when watering. We want to avoid frozen soil, so if it's very cold out, we could hold off on watering then. And as far as frequency, with new trees like this, I'm going to want to continue to water these once a week. We'll check the soil each time, but you know, at least weekly we'll check it and water it if we need to. With bigger trees, we want to look for, once or twice a month, trying to get it well soaked. And again, checking beforehand to make sure that we're not oversaturating the soils. You can't overdo it, so we don't want to overdo it. We'll force all the oxygen out of the soil, so we don't want to do that. But we want to make sure it's evenly moist around that drip zone, and if we need to add moisture, then we'll schedule that monthly.
It's extremely important to properly water your trees and other landscape plants during the colder months so that they can come out of the winter into the spring in good health. We have one announcement of something fun in the gardening world, and that would be that the Lincoln Garden Club has its first meeting of 2014 on January 16th, which is next Monday at 7 o'clock at Color Middle School, and the topic is What's New? The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Be sure to tune in next Saturday when we'll be looking at leaf castings as art pieces and evergreens for windbreaks, among other ideas for your home landscape. Good gardening, good afternoon, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next week.